The wail of sirens pierced the night air as paramedics rushed Olivia Hawthorne, heavily pregnant and writhing in labor, through the emergency doors of Metropolitan General Hospital. At 22, her face was contorted in agony, sweat beading across her forehead as another brutal contraction seized her body. "Stop that pathetic screaming this instant," Charlotte Hawthorne hissed, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping her phone as she live-streamed the chaos to her exclusive social media circle. "You're embarrassing the entire Hawthorne name with this theatrical display." The paramedics exchanged uncomfortable glances as they maneuvered the stretcher through the crowded emergency room. One of them, a seasoned medic with kind eyes, tried to offer Olivia comfort. "You're doing great, honey. Just breathe through it." "Breathing techniques," Charlotte scoffed, never lowering her phone. Her emerald eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as she adjusted the camera angle to capture Olivia's pain-racked face. "Ladies and gentlemen of our distinguished social circle, you're witnessing firsthand why breeding matters. Some people simply cannot rise above their questionable origins, no matter how much refinement we attempt to provide." Olivia's fingers gripped the metal railings until her knuckles went white. Between gasps of pain, she managed to whisper, "Please, Charlotte, not now." "Oh, but this is precisely when our audience needs to see the real you, darling." Charlotte's voice dripped with false sweetness as comments began flooding her live stream. The city's elite were already gathering virtually, drawn like vultures to fresh scandal. After all, the Hawthorne reputation requires absolute transparency about the challenges we face within our own household. Charlotte wasn't concerned about Olivia's health or the baby's well-being. Her primary focus remained fixed on damage control, ensuring that whatever happened tonight would be spun to preserve her own social standing while demolishing Olivia's completely. She had waited years for this moment, and she wouldn't waste the opportunity to destroy the girl who had been a thorn in her side since the day she married Edward Hawthorne. As they approached the delivery ward, Olivia felt a brief moment of relief. Surely Charlotte wouldn't be allowed in the operating room. But even as the medical team prepared to wheel her away, she could hear her stepmother's voice echoing through the corridor, still performing for her digital audience. "I've sacrificed so much for that girl," Charlotte was saying, her tone perfectly modulated to evoke sympathy from her viewers. "Edward and I both have. We've given her every advantage, every opportunity to become a proper Hawthorne. But you simply cannot transform base metal into gold, no matter how much love and effort you invest." The operating room doors swung shut, finally silencing Charlotte's venomous commentary. Olivia found herself surrounded by the efficiency of the medical team, their movements choreographed by years of experience. But as the hours wore on, she caught fragments of increasingly urgent conversations. "Blood pressure's dropping rapidly, we need to prep for emergency procedures, she's losing too much blood." Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Olivia fought to bring her child into the world. When her daughter finally arrived, tiny, perfect, and somehow radiating an unusual alertness for a newborn, Olivia felt an overwhelming surge of protective love. But there was something else, something that made the medical staff exchange puzzled glances. The baby's eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost otherworldly, and when Olivia looked down at her daughter, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as if electricity was coursing through her veins. Meanwhile, the commotion in the waiting area had escalated dramatically. Edward Hawthorne had arrived, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled from his frantic rush to the hospital. His salt and pepper hair was mussed, his expensive suit wrinkled from the journey. "What the hell is going on?" Edward demanded, his voice booming through the waiting room as he spotted Charlotte still live streaming. "Why isn't anyone taking care of Olivia properly? And why are you broadcasting this like some goddamn reality show?" Charlotte immediately shifted into victim mode, lowering her phone with theatrical reluctance. "Oh, Edward, thank goodness you're here. I've been trying so hard to manage everything alone. That girl has been absolutely impossible, screaming and carrying on like she has no breeding whatsoever. I've done my best to maintain some dignity for the family name, but you know how challenging she can be." "Challenging?" Edward's face reddened with fury. "She's giving birth to my grandchild, Charlotte. She needs support, not your constant criticism." Before Charlotte could respond with another carefully crafted manipulation, a harried nurse burst through the delivery room doors. Her scrubs were stained, her face grim with the weight of urgent news. Edward immediately stepped forward, his paternal instincts overriding everything else. What's happening? Is Olivia okay? The baby? The nurse's expression was carefully professional, but Olivia's father could see the concern in her eyes. The baby is stable and healthy, Mr. Hawthorne. But I'm afraid Olivia is experiencing severe complications. She's lost a significant amount of blood, and we're dealing with a critical shortage in our blood bank tonight. Then take mine, Edward said without hesitation, already rolling up his sleeve. Whatever she needs. Sir, you'll need to step aside, the nurse said urgently, already moving toward the elevator. I have to get to the blood bank immediately. We're running out of time. As the medical team rushed to process Edward's blood donation, Charlotte watched with barely concealed anticipation. She had suspected this day might come for years, had even hoped for it. Now, as the lab technician ran the compatibility tests, she held her breath. The results came back within minutes, but they might as well have been a nuclear bomb detonating in the hospital corridor. I'm sorry, Mr. Hawthorne, the technician said quietly, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the hospital. Your blood isn't compatible. You're not a match. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Not just for Olivia's immediate medical crisis, but for everything Edward had believed about his family, his daughter, his entire life. Charlotte's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of pure, triumphant malice before she caught herself. Oh my, she breathed, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of perfectly performed shock. How unexpected. But Edward was no longer listening to her theatrics. The man who had built a $50 billion empire through shrewd intelligence and unwavering determination was experiencing complete cognitive collapse. The implications of the blood test results crashed over him like a tsunami, destroying 22 years of memories, love, and paternal pride in a single moment. Olivia wasn't his daughter. Olivia had never been his daughter. Everything he thought he knew about his family was a lie. Edward? Charlotte reached for his arm, but he jerked away from her touch as if she were poison. I need. Edward stumbled backward, his face pale and drawn. The man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals couldn't form a coherent sentence. I can't, this isn't. And then, to Charlotte's absolute delight and the shock of everyone present, Edward Hawthorne turned and fled. He ran through the hospital corridors like a man escaping a burning building, leaving his daughter, the girl he had raised and loved for 22 years, to face her crisis alone. Charlotte watched him go, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. Phase 1 of her long-awaited revenge was complete. Now it was time for Phase 2. When Olivia finally awakened 3 days later, weak from blood loss but alive, the first face she saw was Charlotte's. Her stepmother sat beside the hospital bed like a carrion bird, perfectly coiffed and radiating malevolent satisfaction. Well, Charlotte purred, setting down the legal documents she had been reviewing. Sleeping Beauty finally awakens. How fitting that you should wake up to discover your entire world has crumbled to ash. Olivia tried to speak, but her throat was parched and raw. She managed to croak out a single word, baby. Your bastard spawn is fine, Charlotte said dismissively. Though I suppose bastard is quite literal now, isn't it? Confusion clouded Olivia's thoughts. Something was wrong, terribly, horribly wrong. Where was Edward? Where was the man who had raised her, who had called her his princess, who had promised to always protect her? Edward. Olivia whispered. Charlotte's laughter was like broken glass. Oh, my dear, sweet, stupid Olivia. Did you really think that charade could last forever? Edward discovered the truth when they tested his blood for your transfusion. You're not his daughter. You never were his daughter. You're nothing but the bastard offspring of whatever trashy affair your mother had before she died. The words hit Olivia like physical blows. No, that's not, he loves me. He loved a lie, Charlotte said, her voice growing crueler with each word. And now that he knows the truth, he wants nothing to do with you. He couldn't even bear to stay in the same building once he learned what you really are. Charlotte leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Let me make something crystal clear, you little parasite. Edward Hawthorne never wants to see your face again. You are nothing to him now, less than nothing. You're an embarrassment, a reminder of his own stupidity in believing your worthless mother's lies. Olivia's eyes began to fill with tears, but Charlotte wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the live stream comments from the night of Olivia's delivery. The entire city knows now, Charlotte continued, showing Olivia the flood of social media posts and news articles that had already begun circulating. Everyone who matters in our social circle has seen your humiliation. They know you're not a real Hawthorne. They know you're just trash pretending to be something you're not. As Charlotte's cruelty reached new depths, something strange began happening to Olivia. Her vision sharpened with almost supernatural clarity, and for a moment, her eyes flashed an otherworldly silver. The heart monitor beside her bed began beeping erratically, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered. But Charlotte was too consumed with her victory to notice these strange phenomena. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. Now, Charlotte said, her smile sharp as a blade, we're going to clean up this mess properly. These documents will formally renounce any claim you might have had to the Hawthorne name, the Hawthorne fortune, and any inheritance rights. You're going to sign them right now, while you're still bleeding and weak, because if you don't, I will make your life an absolute living hell. Olivia stared at the papers through her tears. $50 billion. The inheritance she had never really cared about but had always known would be there. Her entire identity as a Hawthorne. I won't, she whispered. Charlotte's eyes hardened. Oh, but you will. Because if you don't sign these papers, I will ensure that every hospital, every employer, every person in this city knows exactly what kind of fraudulent little con artist you are. I will destroy any chance you have of building any kind of life for yourself or that bastard baby. The threat hung heavy in the air as Charlotte positioned her phone to record yet another humiliation. Sign the papers, Olivia. Sign them while everyone watches, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you disappear quietly instead of making your existence a public spectacle for the rest of your miserable life. With shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, Olivia took the pen Charlotte offered. As she signed her name, renouncing everything she had ever known about herself, Charlotte live-streamed every moment to their social circle. Ladies and gentlemen, Charlotte announced to her digital audience, justice has finally been served. The pretender has been exposed, and the Hawthorne family integrity has been restored. The comments flooded in, mockery, schadenfreude, and cruel laughter from the city's elite who had always resented Olivia's place in their world. But as Olivia signed the final document, her eyes flashed silver again, and this time Charlotte caught a glimpse of it. For just a moment, the woman who had orchestrated this elaborate revenge felt a chill of unease. There was something about Olivia Hawthorne, something about that silver flash in her eyes and the way the very air seemed to respond to her emotions, that suggested this story was far from over. That same night, the hospital's business office delivered the final blow. Olivia sat in her hospital bed, still weak from childbirth and blood loss, when a stern-faced administrator entered her room with a clipboard and an ultimatum. MS. Well, I suppose it's not Ms. Hawthorne anymore, is it? The woman said, her voice clinically cold. You have no health insurance coverage that we can verify, and the bill for your extended stay and emergency procedures has reached nearly $200,000. We need payment arrangements immediately, or we'll be forced to discharge you tonight. Olivia stared at the woman in disbelief. Tonight? But my daughter. Your daughter is healthy and ready for discharge as well, the administrator replied matter-of-factly. You have 2 hours to arrange payment or find alternative accommodations. As if summoned by the sound of Olivia's desperation, Charlotte appeared in the doorway. She surveyed the scene with obvious satisfaction, her designer handbag clutched in her perfectly manicured hands. Oh dear, Charlotte said with false sympathy, financial troubles already? How unfortunate. Of course, if you were still a Hawthorne, this wouldn't be a problem. But since you've signed away any claim to that name. She shrugged elegantly. Please, Olivia whispered, her voice breaking. I just need a few days to figure something out. Figure something out? Charlotte laughed. With what resources? With what connections? You're nobody now, Olivia. You have nothing and no one. The sooner you accept that reality, the better. 2 hours later, Olivia found herself standing on the hospital steps in the thin clothes she had worn when the labor pain started 3 days earlier. She clutched her newborn daughter against her chest, trying to shield the baby from the cold wind that whipped through the city streets. The sky opened up as if on cue, releasing a torrent of rain that soaked through Olivia's inadequate clothing within minutes. Thunder rolled overhead, and lightning illuminated the dark streets in stark, brief flashes. But as Olivia stood there in the storm, homeless and abandoned, holding her infant daughter, something extraordinary happened. Her eyes flashed silver once more, brighter than the lightning above, and for just a moment, the rain seemed to part around her and the baby. In that moment of supernatural clarity, Olivia Hawthorne made a vow that would echo through the years to come. She might have lost her name, her fortune, and her family, but she was not broken. She was not defeated. She was something else entirely, something that neither Charlotte nor Edward could understand or control. And one day, they would all learn exactly what that something was. As Olivia disappeared into the stormy night with her daughter, the question remained, who would come to her rescue in her darkest hour? The answer to that question would change everything. Chapter 2. The storm raged with unprecedented fury, turning the elite Manhattan streets into rivers of chaos. Olivia stumbled through the deluge, her thin hospital gown plastered to her weakened body as she clutched her newborn daughter against her chest. Every step sent waves of pain through her still healing body, but she pressed forward, driven by nothing more than maternal instinct and the desperate need to find shelter for her child. The baby, she still hadn't even had time to name her properly, remained unnaturally calm despite the tempest surrounding them. Those strange, intelligent eyes seemed to take in everything, as if the infant understood far more than any newborn should. When lightning flashed overhead, the baby's eyes reflected the light with an almost otherworldly gleam that matched the silver flashes Olivia had been experiencing since the birth. 3 blocks from the hospital, Olivia's strength finally gave out. The blood loss, the emotional trauma, and the physical exhaustion of carrying a newborn through a storm proved too much. She collapsed against a wrought iron fence outside an exclusive residential building, her legs buckling beneath her as consciousness threatened to slip away. The rain seemed to intensify as if nature itself was conspiring against her. Water streamed down her face, mixing tears with raindrops as she held her daughter closer, trying to shield the baby with what little warmth her body could provide. This was how it would end, she thought dimly, 2 discarded lives washing away in the storm, forgotten by everyone who had once claimed to love them. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The sleek black Bugatti that pulled up to the curb moved with predatory grace, its engine purring like a satisfied cat despite the chaos of the storm. The driver's door opened, and a figure emerged that commanded attention even in the midst of the tempest. Maxwell Ashford stepped into the rain without regard for his expensive Italian suit, his steel-gray eyes immediately locking onto the huddled form against the fence. At 28, Maxwell Ashford was everything the media loved to photograph and society pages loved to feature. Heir to the Ashford Empire, a conglomerate that had been the Hawthorne family's primary rival for 3 generations, he possessed the kind of aristocratic beauty that seemed almost supernatural. His dark hair was swept back from sharp, angular features, and his tall, powerful frame moved with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. But it was his eyes that truly set him apart. They held an intensity that seemed to see through pretense and straight to the truth of things. Those same eyes now took in Olivia's desperate situation with calculating precision. Christ, he muttered under his breath, striding toward her without hesitation. The rain seemed to part around him as he moved, though that could have been Olivia's fading consciousness playing tricks on her vision. Olivia looked up at him through the haze of exhaustion and pain, recognizing the face that had graced countless magazine covers and business journals. Maxwell Ashford, the enemy. The rival family heir who had been Edward's primary competitor in every business venture for the past decade. If Edward had been a king in their world, Maxwell was the prince of the opposing kingdom. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "My baby." Maxwell's expression softened as he took in the scene, the young woman who had clearly just given birth, the infant clutched protectively in her arms, the desperation etched into every line of her face. He didn't hesitate. In one fluid movement, he removed his suit jacket and wrapped it around both Olivia and her daughter. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice brooking no argument as he carefully lifted them both into his arms. Olivia was struck by how effortlessly he carried them, as if she and the baby weighed nothing at all. As Maxwell settled them into the warm leather interior of his car, another vehicle pulled up behind them. A silver Maserati disgorged its occupant with considerably less grace than Maxwell had shown. Gabriella Ashford emerged into the storm, her designer umbrella doing little to protect her perfectly styled blonde hair from the wind and rain. "Maxwell," she called out, her voice sharp with irritation as she hurried toward the Bugatti. "What in God's name are you doing out here? I've been trying to reach you for..." Her words died abruptly as she peered into the car and recognized the bedraggled figure huddled in the passenger seat. Gabriella Ashford was everything her brother was not. Where Maxwell possessed understated elegance, she flaunted ostentatious wealth. Where he moved with calculated precision, she operated on pure emotion and social climbing instinct. At 25, she had never worked a day in her life but considered herself an expert on everyone else's worthiness. Her perfectly sculpted features twisted into an expression of disgust as recognition dawned. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Maxwell, that's Olivia Hawthorne, or should I say, Olivia Nobody, since we all know she's not actually a Hawthorne anymore." Gabriella's laugh was cruel and sharp, designed to cut. "The entire city has been talking about her spectacular fall from grace. Charlotte Hawthorne live-streamed the whole pathetic scene, the bastard revelation, the inheritance renunciation, everything. It's been the most entertaining scandal our social circle has seen in years." Olivia flinched at each word, clutching her daughter closer as shame burned through her exhaustion. Even in her weakened state, she could feel that strange energy building within her again, the same force that had made her eyes flash silver and caused the lights to flicker in the hospital. "The real question," Gabriella continued, her voice dripping with malicious glee, "is what Edward Hawthorne's discarded garbage is doing collapsed in the gutter like common trash. Though I suppose that's exactly what she is now, isn't it?" Maxwell's expression had grown progressively colder as his sister spoke, his jaw tightening with barely controlled anger. When Gabriella suggested they simply drive away and leave Olivia in the storm, his patience finally snapped. "Gabriella." His voice cut through the rain like a blade, causing his sister to step back involuntarily. "Shut your mouth. Now." The command in his tone was absolute, carrying the weight of authority that made even his self-absorbed sister recognize she had crossed a line. Maxwell's eyes had taken on an almost predatory intensity, and for a moment, Gabriella caught a glimpse of the ruthless businessman who had expanded the Ashford empire by 30% in just 5 years. "True alphas," Maxwell said, his voice low and dangerous, "protect the weak. They don't kick them when they're down. If you can't understand that basic principle, then you understand nothing about what it means to carry the Ashford name." He turned away from Gabriella's shocked face and started the engine. "Go home, Gabriella. And if I hear that you've been spreading gossip about tonight, you'll find your trust fund indefinitely frozen while you learn some basic human decency." As the Bugatti pulled away from the curb, Olivia caught a glimpse of Gabriella's furious expression in the side mirror. She knew instinctively that Maxwell's sister would not take this humiliation quietly. Maxwell's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential towers. As the private elevator carried them upward, Olivia found herself studying her unexpected rescuer through exhausted eyes. Nothing about this made sense. The Ashfords and Hawthornes had been business rivals for decades, their competition legendary in New York's financial circles. Why would Maxwell help her? "Why?" she whispered, voicing her confusion as the elevator doors opened into a palatial living space that overlooked Central Park. Maxwell carried her to a plush leather sofa near a massive fireplace, which roared to life at the touch of a button. "Because you needed help," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. A staff member appeared as if by magic, a distinguished older woman who took one look at Olivia's condition and immediately sprang into action. Within minutes, Olivia found herself wrapped in warm blankets, with hot soup appearing at her elbow and a pediatric nurse summoned to check on the baby. "The child appears to be in perfect health," the nurse reported to Maxwell after her examination. "Remarkably alert for a newborn, actually. I've never seen such aware eyes in an infant so young." As the medical professional departed, Maxwell settled into the chair across from Olivia, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "More importantly, I know who you really are." Olivia looked up from where she was attempting to feed her daughter with a bottle the nurse had provided. "I don't understand." "Olivia Hawthorne," Maxwell said, then corrected himself. "No, that's not right, is it? Olivia Fenris. That's your true name." The bottle slipped from Olivia's nerveless fingers, only Maxwell's quick reflexes preventing it from hitting the floor. "What did you say?" "Fenris Hawthorne," Maxwell repeated, his voice gentle but firm. "Edward's older brother. Your real father." The room seemed to spin around Olivia as the implications of Maxwell's words sank in. "That's impossible. Edward never mentioned having a brother." "Because Fenris has been dead for 23 years, Maxwell said, his expression growing dark. "Murdered by his own family when you were just an infant." Olivia's world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about her identity, her family, her entire life was crumbling once again. But this time, instead of losing something, she was discovering a truth that might change everything. "Tell me," she whispered. Maxwell leaned forward, his voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting a long-buried secret. Fenris Hawthorne was everything Edward pretended to be: honorable, principled, genuinely concerned about ethics in business. He discovered that the Hawthorne empire was built on corruption, money laundering, and worse. When he threatened to expose it all, he became a liability. The fire crackled in the silence as Maxwell continued. "The official story was a car accident. But my father knew the truth. Fenris was murdered on Edward's orders. Your mother went into hiding when she realized she was pregnant, but the Hawthornes found her eventually. She died protecting your secret, and somehow you ended up being raised by the very man who killed your real father." Olivia's eyes flashed silver with the intensity of her emotions, and for a moment, the flames in the fireplace seemed to dance in response to her inner turmoil. Her daughter, as if sensing her mother's distress, began to fuss, her own eyes reflecting that same otherworldly light. "Why are you telling me this?" Olivia asked, her voice breaking. "Because Fenris Hawthorne was my father's closest friend," Maxwell said quietly. "They were business partners before the corruption took hold. My father promised Fenris that if anything happened to him, the Ashford family would watch over his child. We've been searching for you for over 20 years. The revelation hit Olivia like a physical blow. Everything made sense now, the strange sense of familiarity she'd always felt when she saw Maxwell in the media, the way Edward had always seemed slightly uncomfortable around her despite his professed love, the lingering guilt that had shadowed his interactions with her. "There's more," Maxwell said, reaching into his briefcase and withdrawing a thick folder of documents. "Fenris wasn't just an idealist, he was also brilliant. Before his death, he moved substantial assets into offshore accounts, hidden trusts, and investment vehicles that were completely separate from the Hawthorne empire." Olivia stared at the documents Maxwell was spreading across the coffee table: bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, all bearing her name as the primary beneficiary. $2 billion, Maxwell said simply. "That's what your real father left you. It's been growing in carefully managed accounts for over 20 years, waiting for you to claim it." The numbers on the papers seemed to dance before Olivia's eyes. $2 billion. More money than she had ever dreamed of, even as a Hawthorne heir. Money that was truly hers, untainted by the corruption and cruelty that had defined her childhood. "But there's a catch," Maxwell continued, his expression growing serious. "To claim this inheritance, you'll need to prove your identity legally. That means DNA tests, court proceedings, and most importantly, going up against the Hawthorne family who will fight this claim with everything they have." Olivia looked down at her daughter, who was watching the conversation with those impossibly intelligent eyes. In that moment, she made a decision that would reshape not just her own destiny, but the entire power structure of New York's elite society. "How do we start?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been since the hospital. Maxwell smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since he'd found her in the storm. "We start by making you disappear for a while. The Hawthorns think you're broken and helpless, and we're going to let them continue thinking that while we build our case." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Gabriella's voice echoed from the elevator as she arrived unannounced, a privilege of family that she regularly abused. "Maxwell, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier," Gabriella called out as she stepped into the penthouse. Her voice carried that false sweetness that always preceded her most venomous attacks. "I really think you should reconsider this charity case situation. People are already talking." She paused dramatically as she entered the living room, taking in the scene of Olivia comfortably settled on the sofa with legal documents spread around her. "Oh, how cozy. The fallen princess has made herself quite at home, hasn't she?" "Gabriella," Maxwell began, but his sister was just getting started. "No, really, I think our social circle deserves to know that Maxwell Ashford is keeping Hawthorne's discarded bastard as some sort of pet project. It's quite the scandal, really. The newspapers would have such fun with it. Ashford heir rescues rival's trash." Olivia felt that familiar surge of energy building within her, her eyes beginning to flash silver as anger coursed through her veins. But before she could respond, Maxwell was on his feet, his own anger evident in every line of his body. "That's enough, Gabriella. You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," Gabriella purred, clearly enjoying the drama she was creating. "I know exactly what this is." Poor Olivia, cast out by the only family she's ever known, desperate for someone, anyone, to take pity on her. "And you, playing the noble savior to some tragic little waif who is worth more than you'll ever be," Maxwell cut her off sharply. "Olivia isn't charity, Gabriella. She's justice. She's the rightful heir to a fortune that makes the Hawthorne empire look like pocket change." Gabriella's confidence faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" Maxwell gestured to the documents spread across the table. "Olivia is Fenris Hawthorne's daughter. The legitimate heir to assets worth over $2 billion. Assets that have been waiting for her to claim them for over 20 years. The color drained from Gabriella's face as the implications sank in. Olivia wasn't just some discarded charity case. She was potentially one of the wealthiest women in the city. And if Maxwell was supporting her claim... "That's impossible," Gabriella whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "The DNA tests will prove it," Maxwell said coldly. "And when they do, Olivia will have the resources to destroy everyone who has wronged her. Starting with the Hawthorne family who murdered her father and stole her birthright." As Gabriella stood frozen in shock, Olivia felt a transformation beginning within her. The broken, abandoned girl who had signed away her inheritance just hours ago was gone. In her place was emerging someone far more dangerous, a woman with the means, the motive, and the mysterious power to reshape the world that had cast her out. The storm outside was finally beginning to clear, but Olivia suspected that for the Hawthorne family, the real tempest was just beginning. And this time, she would be the one controlling the lightning. Chapter 3. 3 weeks after the storm that had changed everything, Olivia found herself seated at the head of a mahogany conference table in Maxwell's private office, surrounded by the most powerful people she had ever encountered. These were Maxwell's inner circle, his pack, as he called them, the brilliant minds and ruthless strategists who had helped build the Ashford Empire into an unstoppable force. Fiona Matthews, the sharp-eyed chief legal counsel whose reputation for destroying opponents in court was legendary, spread DNA test results across the table with the satisfaction of a hunter displaying a fresh kill. 99.7% probability, she announced, her voice crisp with professional triumph. Olivia is definitively Fenris Hawthorne's daughter. No court in the world would dispute this evidence. Beside her, Robert Fisher, Maxwell's head of corporate acquisitions, pulled up financial projections on his tablet. The offshore accounts are clean and fully accessible. $2.3 billion now, with compound interest and strategic investments over the past 23 years. Plus real estate holdings in 7 countries that the Hawthorne family doesn't even know exist. Olivia held her 3-week-old daughter, whom she had finally named Isabel, and listened to these titans of industry discuss her life with the same clinical precision they might use to plan a hostile takeover. The baby remained unnaturally alert during these meetings, her unusual eyes tracking the speakers as if she understood every word being spoken. "The challenge," interjected Dr. Miranda Hayes, the family's crisis management specialist, "is that Charlotte Hawthorne isn't sitting idle. Our sources indicate she's mounting a comprehensive campaign to discredit Olivia before any legal proceedings can begin." Maxwell leaned back in his chair, his steel-gray eyes focused on Olivia with an intensity that still made her pulse quicken. "What kind of campaign?" "The usual arsenal," Dr. Hayes replied, consulting her notes. "She's spreading rumors about Olivia's mental stability, questioning her fitness as a mother, suggesting that the stress of her delusions about being a true Hawthorne heir have driven her to psychotic breaks. She's even hired a team of private investigators to gather any compromising information they can find." Olivia felt that familiar surge of energy building within her, her eyes beginning to flash with silver fire. Isabel responded to her mother's emotional state by making soft cooing sounds and reaching toward Olivia's face with tiny fingers that seemed to spark with their own inner light. "Let her try," Olivia said, her voice carrying a new strength that surprised even her. "I'm not the broken girl who signed away her inheritance anymore." Fiona smiled with predatory satisfaction. "That's exactly the attitude we need. But Olivia, you have to understand, this isn't just about reclaiming money. This is corporate warfare at its most vicious level. The Hawthorne family will use every dirty trick in the book to discredit you, and they have decades of experience in destroying their enemies." "Then I'll learn to fight back," Olivia replied, adjusting Isabel in her arms. "Teach me." Over the following days, Olivia immersed herself in a crash course in high-stakes business strategy. Fiona taught her how to read legal documents and spot the traps lawyers like to hide in seemingly innocent contracts. Robert showed her how financial markets could be manipulated to destroy a company's stock price or boost a competitor's position. Dr. Hayes coached her on media management and public perception, how to control a narrative and destroy an opponent's credibility. But it was Maxwell who taught her the most important lesson of all, how to think like a predator. "The Hawthornes have always operated from a position of assumed superiority," he explained during one of their private strategy sessions. "They believe their wealth and social position make them untouchable. That arrogance is their weakness." Olivia was learning quickly, her mind absorbing tactical knowledge with the same supernatural efficiency her daughter displayed in her rapid development. But while she grew stronger, Gabriella Ashford was working just as hard to undermine her. "I don't understand why you're all enabling this fantasy," Gabriella announced during a family dinner, her voice carrying that particular brand of venom she reserved for Olivia. "She's basically a charity case," the stray Maxwell picked up out of misplaced sympathy. "And now we're all pretending she's some kind of corporate mastermind?" Maxwell's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "Gabriella, you're walking a very thin line." "Am I?" Gabriella's eyes glittered with malice. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you've allowed your savior complex to compromise the entire family's reputation. Do you have any idea what people are saying about us harboring Hawthorne's discarded bastard?" The words hit their mark, and Olivia felt the familiar sting of shame mixing with her growing anger. But before she could respond, Isabel began to cry, not the normal wailing of an infant, but an almost musical sound that seemed to resonate through the room with supernatural intensity. Instantly, the lights in the dining room began to flicker, and the crystal glasses on the table started to vibrate slightly. Gabriella's eyes widened in alarm, but before she could comment, Maxwell was on his feet. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "Gabriella, you will show Olivia the respect she deserves, or you will find yourself permanently excluded from family business matters." But Gabriella's campaign of social sabotage was just beginning. Within days, Olivia discovered that she had been quietly blacklisted from every significant social event in the city. Charity galas, art gallery openings, exclusive restaurant reservations, doors that had once opened automatically for her as a Hawthorne now remained firmly closed. "She's very good at this," Dr. Hayes observed when they reviewed the extent of Gabriella's influence. She's positioning herself as protecting the social order from an unstable pretender. It's a classic reputation assassination technique. Olivia's response surprised everyone, including herself. Then we'll create our own events. The Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dender Gallery had been transformed into a glittering wonderland for the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. New York's elite circulated through the space in their finest evening wear, champagne glasses in hand as they admired both the ancient Egyptian architecture and each other's carefully curated appearances. Olivia made her entrance deliberately late, knowing that timing was everything in the theater of high society. She wore a midnight blue gown that Maxwell had commissioned specifically for tonight, a creation that managed to be both elegantly modest and devastatingly beautiful. Her hair was swept up in a style that showcased the delicate silver earrings that seemed to echo the otherworldly light in her eyes. But it was the confidence in her bearing that truly commanded attention. This was not the broken girl who had been cast out into the storm 3 weeks ago. This was a woman who had discovered her own power and was ready to wield it. Gabriella spotted her immediately and moved through the crowd with predatory grace, gathering an audience of Manhattan's most influential socialites as she prepared to deliver what she clearly intended to be a devastating public humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriella announced, her voice carrying that false warmth that always preceded her cruelest attacks, "I believe most of you remember Olivia Hawthorne, or perhaps I should say Olivia Nobody, since we all know how that situation resolved itself." Polite laughter rippled through the gathering crowd, the kind of refined cruelty that high society had perfected over generations. Olivia remained perfectly composed, though her eyes began to take on that familiar silver gleam. "Of course," Gabriella continued, her smile sharp as a blade, "we should probably introduce her properly now. This is Olivia, the former heiress turned single mother, who my dear brother has taken in as something of a charity project. Isn't it wonderful how the Ashford family supports those less fortunate?" The crowd's attention was completely focused now, sensing blood in the water. This was the kind of social execution that would be discussed in drawing rooms and country clubs for months to come. But Olivia had learned well from her teachers. "Thank you for that introduction, Gabriella," Olivia said, her voice carrying clearly through the gallery. "It's always refreshing to meet someone so concerned with charity work. Speaking of which, I hope everyone is enjoying this beautiful venue tonight." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled guests before delivering her carefully prepared blow. "I'm particularly pleased that the renovation I funded last year turned out so beautifully. When I purchased this building through my investment consortium, I wasn't sure the Temple of Dender would provide the right atmosphere for this kind of event." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the crowd understood exactly what Olivia had just revealed. She wasn't some discarded charity case. She was wealthy enough to buy one of Manhattan's most prestigious cultural institutions. Gabriella's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a fury so intense that several guests took involuntary steps backward. "That's impossible," Gabriella whispered, but her voice carried in the dead silence. Olivia smiled, and for just a moment, her eyes flashed with that supernatural silver light. "Is it? Perhaps you should have done your research before attempting to publicly humiliate someone, Gabriella. It's a dangerous game when you don't know who you're playing against." The crowd was murmuring now, the whispers spreading through the gallery like wildfire. Olivia could see the calculations happening behind carefully maintained expressions. If she owned this building, what else might she own? How much was she actually worth? And most importantly, which side of this conflict should they choose? But even as Olivia savored her victory, she knew that Gabriella's humiliation would only escalate the war between them. The counterattack came faster than anyone had anticipated. 2 days after the gala, Dr. Hayes burst into Maxwell's office with an expression of barely controlled panic. "We have a problem," she announced, spreading a collection of legal documents across his desk. "Charlotte Hawthorne has filed for emergency custody of Isabel." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face as she read the accusations outlined in the legal filing. According to Charlotte's petition, Olivia was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, exhibiting dangerous delusions about her parentage and financial status, and posed a significant risk to her infant daughter's safety and well-being. She's claiming that Olivia's belief that she's Fenris Hawthorne's daughter is evidence of a complete break from reality, Fiona explained, her usual confidence shaken. She has affidavits from hospital staff describing Olivia's erratic behavior during her stay, statements from social workers expressing concern about her ability to care for a newborn, and psychological evaluations that paint her as dangerously unstable. Those evaluations are fabricated, Maxwell said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Of course they are, Fiona replied. But they're very well done. Charlotte has clearly invested significant resources in making this case appear legitimate. Olivia looked down at Isabel, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms despite the chaos surrounding them. Even in sleep, the baby's face held that unusual alertness, as if she were absorbing and processing everything happening around her. There's more, Dr. Hayes continued reluctantly. The private investigators Charlotte hired have been conducting surveillance on Olivia for weeks. They have photographs, recordings, documentation of every move she's made since leaving the hospital. As if summoned by their conversation, Maxwell's head of security appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Sir, we have a situation. The apartment building where Ms. Olivia was staying, her unit has been broken into. Olivia's heart stopped. Broken into? Professional job, the security chief continued. They were looking for something specific, went through every document, every personal item. This wasn't random burglary. This was intelligence gathering. The implications were clear and terrifying. Charlotte's investigators weren't just watching Olivia, they were actively building a case against her, gathering any evidence they could use to prove her unfit for motherhood. That's it, Maxwell said, his voice carrying absolute finality. Olivia, you and Isabel are moving into the penthouse permanently. Full security detail, complete protection. No one gets near either of you without my approval. Olivia wanted to protest, to maintain some independence, but the reality of her situation was undeniable. She was fighting for her daughter's life against opponents with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. They're not just trying to take my money, she realized, her voice barely above a whisper. They're trying to take everything. But as she spoke, Isabel's eyes opened, and for a moment, they blazed with that same supernatural silver light that Olivia was learning to recognize as a sign of her own emerging power. The baby looked directly at her mother, and Olivia could have sworn she saw understanding, and promise, in those impossible intelligent eyes. Whatever genetic legacy Fenris Hawthorne had passed to his daughter, it was manifesting in ways that went far beyond mere intelligence. And if Charlotte Hawthorne thought she could use traditional weapons to destroy this family, she was about to discover just how dangerous it was to threaten a mother and child who were anything but ordinary. The war for Olivia's inheritance was about to become something much more primal, a battle between predators that would reshape the very foundations of New York's elite society. And Olivia was finally ready to hunt. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 4. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maxwell's penthouse as Olivia sat in the leather chair beside the fireplace, cradling Isabel while Fiona Matthews spread genetic analysis reports across the coffee table. The baby's unusual alertness had prompted Maxwell to request comprehensive testing, hoping to understand the source of her extraordinary development. The results are fascinating, Fiona said, her usual professional composure tinged with genuine amazement. Isabel's genetic markers indicate exceptional intelligence potential, enhanced physical capabilities, and some traits we've frankly never seen before in standard human genetics. Olivia traced her finger along Isabel's tiny hand, marveling at how the infant's eyes seemed to track every movement with supernatural precision. And her father? Fiona's expression grew more serious as she pulled up the genetic database results on her tablet. That's where things get complicated. The paternal DNA markers led us to a match in the Executive Genetic Registry, a database that most Fortune 500 CEOs participate in for security and medical purposes. She turned the screen toward Olivia, revealing a photograph that made Olivia's blood run cold. Julian Redford stared back at her from the screen, his darkly handsome features exactly as she remembered them from their passionate affair 6 months ago. Julian Redford, Fiona continued, reading from the file. CEO of Redford Corporation, heir to a shipping and logistics empire worth approximately $8 billion. Age 29, unmarried, known for his complicated personal relationships. Olivia felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Julian, charming, seductive Julian who had pursued her relentlessly when she was still living as Edward's daughter. Julian who had whispered promises of love and marriage in her ear during their stolen nights together. Julian who had vanished the moment she tearfully told him she was pregnant. He knew, Olivia whispered, her voice hollow with the realization. He knew who Isabel's father was, and he disappeared anyway. Maxwell moved to stand behind her chair, his presence both protective and comforting. What exactly happened between you two? Olivia's eyes flashed silver as the painful memories surfaced. He pursued me for months. Expensive gifts, romantic dinners, weekend trips to his private estate. He said he loved me, that he wanted to marry me and start a family together. Her voice grew bitter. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he needed time to process the news. That was the last time I heard from him. Until now, Fiona interjected, consulting her tablet again. Because according to our sources, Julian Redford is scheduled to attend the quarterly New York Business Council meeting this afternoon. The same meeting where Maxwell will be presenting the Ashford Corporation's latest acquisitions. The implications were clear. Julian would be in the same room, probably having no idea that Olivia had discovered his identity as Isabel's father. It was an opportunity too perfect to waste. I want to be there, Olivia said, her voice carrying a steel that surprised even her. Maxwell frowned with concern. Olivia, are you sure? Confronting him publicly could. Could what? Embarrass him? Olivia's laugh held no humor. He abandoned his pregnant girlfriend because it was inconvenient for his reputation. I think it's time Julian Redford learned what real embarrassment feels like. The New York Business Council met in the penthouse conference room of the Meridian Tower, a gleaming testament to corporate power that overlooked Central Park. Olivia had chosen her outfit carefully, a sharp black business suit that projected authority while the subtle silver jewelry echoed the otherworldly light in her eyes. She entered the conference room beside Maxwell, drawing immediate attention from the assembled business leaders. Many recognized her from the charity gala incident, and whispers followed in their wake as they took their seats at the massive circular table. Julian was seated across the room, his attention focused on his phone until he happened to glance up and see her. The color drained from his face, and Olivia had the satisfaction of watching him nearly drop his device in shock. Ladies and gentlemen, the council chairman announced, today's agenda includes presentations from Ashford Corporation and Redford Industries regarding their recent market expansions. Julian recovered his composure quickly, as Olivia had known he would. He was nothing if not skilled at maintaining appearances under pressure. When his turn came to present, he stood with his characteristic confidence, commanding the room's attention with practiced ease. Redford Corporation has seen unprecedented growth this quarter, he began, his voice smooth and authoritative. Our shipping routes have expanded into 3 new markets, and our logistics technology has revolutionized supply chain efficiency across multiple industries. Olivia waited, letting him build his momentum before she made her move. When Julian opened the floor for questions, she stood gracefully. Mr. Redford, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, I'm curious about your company's policies regarding corporate responsibility and personal accountability. Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his smile remained steady. We pride ourselves on the highest standards of ethical business practices, MS. Olivia, she said simply, allowing him to sweat as he tried to determine whether she would reveal their connection. I'm particularly interested in how your corporation handles situations where executives might abandon their responsibilities when they become inconvenient. The room's attention was riveted now, sensing an undercurrent of tension that promised drama. Julian's composure cracked slightly. I'm not sure I understand your question, he said, but his voice had lost some of its smooth confidence. Let me be more specific, Olivia replied, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a small recording device. I'm wondering about your personal philosophy regarding promises made in private versus public accountability. Julian's eyes locked onto the device, and Olivia saw the exact moment he realized what she was holding. The blood drained from his face as she pressed play. Julian's voice filled the conference room, intimate and tender in a way that contrasted sharply with his current corporate persona. Olivia, darling, I've never felt this way about anyone before. I want to marry you, to build a life together. When we have children, they'll have everything: love, security, a future worthy of our combined legacies. The recording continued, capturing Julian's passionate declarations of love and commitment, his promises of marriage and family, his assurances that nothing would ever separate them. The assembled business leaders listened in stunned silence as the romantic promises gave way to more intimate conversations that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Julian stood frozen at the head of the table, his carefully constructed professional image crumbling in real time. Of course, Olivia continued conversationally. That recording was made approximately 7 months ago. Interestingly, Mr. Redford's communication with me ceased entirely the moment I informed him that his promises of children and family were about to become reality. She stood, smoothing her skirt with deliberate precision. I suppose some people's definition of corporate responsibility doesn't extend to their personal lives. Though I do find it fascinating that a man who claims to value ethical business practices would abandon a pregnant woman who believed his promises of love and marriage. Julian finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. Olivia, you're taking things out of context. You trapped me. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Olivia felt that familiar surge of energy building within her. Her eyes began to flash silver, and several of the electronic devices in the room flickered in response to her emotional state. Trapped you? Olivia's voice carried a dangerous edge that made several council members unconsciously lean away from her. With what? Your own words. Your own promises. Your own child. She moved around the table with predatory grace, closing the distance between them. Let me be very clear, Julian. I didn't trap you with anything. I trusted you. I believed in you. I carried your daughter for 9 months while you disappeared like a coward because facing responsibility was inconvenient for your precious reputation. The room was electric with tension, every person present recognizing that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple business presentation gone wrong. This was a reckoning. Julian tried to rally, his voice gaining strength as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. Everyone makes mistakes in relationships. That doesn't mean mistakes. Olivia interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. Having a child isn't a mistake, Julian. It's a consequence of choices. And you chose to run rather than face the reality of what we created together. She reached into her purse again and withdrew several photographs, images of Isabel that clearly showed the baby's unusual intelligence and otherworldly beauty. This is your daughter, Julian. Isabel. She's 4 weeks old, extraordinarily gifted, and absolutely perfect. She also carries genetic markers that suggest she's inherited some very special traits from both her parents. Julian stared at the photographs, and for a moment, Olivia saw genuine emotion flicker across his features, wonder, perhaps even regret. But it was quickly replaced by calculation. If this is about money, he began. This isn't about money, Olivia cut him off, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This is about justice. This is about a man who thinks he can make promises, break them when convenient, and face no consequences for his actions. She turned to address the room, her voice carrying to every corner of the conference space. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Julian Redford, a man whose word is worthless, whose promises are lies, and whose definition of corporate responsibility apparently doesn't extend to the children he creates. The damage to Julian's reputation was immediate and catastrophic. Olivia could see it in the expressions of the other council members, in the way several were already reaching for their phones to share this bombshell with their own networks. In a world where personal character was often considered just as important as business acumen, Julian had been publicly exposed as fundamentally untrustworthy. As Olivia gathered her things to leave, Julian made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Olivia, wait. We should discuss this privately. Perhaps we can work out some kind of arrangement. Olivia turned back to him, her eyes blazing with silver fire that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "There is no arrangement, Julian. There is no private discussion. You had your chance to be a father, to be a partner, to be a man worthy of the promises you made. You chose to run. Now you can live with the consequences of that choice." She paused at the conference room door, delivering her final blow with devastating precision. "Oh, and Julian? If you ever come near me or my daughter again, you'll discover that abandoning us was the wisest decision you ever made. Because the woman you discarded is gone. In her place is someone far more dangerous than you could possibly imagine." Meanwhile, across the city, Gabriella Ashford sat in Charlotte Hawthorne's opulent living room, sharing afternoon tea and deadly gossip. The alliance between these two women had been inevitable. Both had been humiliated by Olivia's unexpected rise to power, and both were determined to see her destroyed. "The custody hearing is scheduled for next week," Charlotte was saying, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "My lawyers are confident that Olivia's erratic behavior and delusional claims about her parentage will be sufficient to remove the child from her care." Gabriella leaned forward conspiratorially. "She's been spending most of her time in strategy meetings with Maxwell's inner circle. They're planning something big. Fiona Matthews has been working around the clock on legal documents, and Robert Fisher has been analyzing financial structures that could only be related to hostile takeovers." "Excellent," Charlotte purred. "The more evidence we have of her grandiose delusions, the stronger our case becomes." "What else?" "She's been making significant purchases through shell corporations," Gabriella continued, clearly enjoying her role as informant. "Real estate, art, businesses, she's spending money like she actually has billions to burn." Charlotte's smile turned predatory. "Perfect. We'll present it as evidence of manic spending behavior consistent with severe mental illness. The courts will have no choice but to declare her unfit." But as the two women plotted Olivia's destruction, neither was aware of the deeper game being played. Edward Hawthorne sat in his study 50 miles away, surrounded by financial documents that painted a desperate picture of his company's true condition. For years, Edward had been embezzling from Hawthorne Industries to fund his lavish lifestyle and poor investment decisions. What had started as temporary borrowing had evolved into systematic theft, and now the company's auditors were closing in. He needed a massive influx of legitimate capital to cover the missing funds before his crimes were discovered. The offshore accounts that Olivia had inherited from Fenris, her real father, represented his only hope of avoiding complete ruin and potential prison time. But to access those funds, he would need Olivia to voluntarily transfer them back to the family. And for that to happen, she would need to be desperate enough to make a deal. Edward reached for his phone and dialed a number he had hoped never to use. When a gruff voice answered, he took a deep breath and committed to a course of action that would escalate this family war into something far more dangerous. "It's Edward Hawthorne," he said quietly. "I need your services for a delicate matter. Nothing permanent, just enough pressure to motivate someone to be reasonable." The attack came that evening as Olivia was returning to Maxwell's penthouse from a late strategy meeting. She had taken a detour through Central Park, needing the cool air and quiet space to process the day's confrontations. Isabel was safe with Maxwell's security team at the penthouse, allowing Olivia a rare moment of solitude. The first sign of danger was the unnatural silence that settled over the normally bustling park paths. Olivia's instincts, those same supernatural senses that had been growing stronger since Isabel's birth, screamed warnings that made her pause mid-step. 3 men emerged from the shadows of the trees, their movements coordinated and professional. These weren't random muggers, they were hired muscle, expensive and experienced. "Ms. Olivia," the largest of them said, his voice deceptively polite. "We'd like to have a conversation with you about your recent legal claims. Some people think you might be overreaching, and they'd like you to reconsider your position." Olivia felt that familiar energy building within her, but this time it was different, more primal, more powerful. Her eyes began to glow with silver fire as ancient instincts awakened in her blood. "And if I refuse to reconsider," she asked, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the men take involuntary steps backward. "Then we'll have to convince you," the leader replied, but his confidence was wavering as he took in the supernatural changes occurring in Olivia's appearance. The first man moved toward her with professional efficiency, clearly expecting to overpower a frightened young woman. Instead, he found himself facing something far more dangerous than he had bargained for. Olivia's latent alpha instincts exploded into full activation. She moved with inhuman speed and grace, her combat skills emerging from some genetic memory that transcended normal human limitations. The first attacker found himself thrown against a tree with bone-crushing force before he could even register her movement. The second man pulled a weapon, but Olivia was already inside his guard, her hand closing around his throat with strength that should have been impossible for someone of her size. Her eyes blazed with silver fire as she lifted him off his feet. "Tell whoever sent you," she said, her voice carrying the authority of an apex predator, "that they've made a critical error in judgment. I am not the helpless girl they think I am. I am something far more dangerous, and if they come for me or my daughter again, I will show them exactly what that means." She released the man, who collapsed gasping to the ground. The third attacker had already fled, recognizing that this situation had evolved far beyond his pay grade. As Olivia stood among her defeated opponents, her eyes still blazing with otherworldly power, she realized that tonight had changed everything. The dormant genetic legacy of her bloodline had finally awakened, transforming her from prey into predator. Charlotte Hawthorne and her allies had wanted to scare her into submission. Instead, they had awakened something that would reshape the very foundations of their world. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 5. The war against Olivia Hawthorne had evolved into something far more sophisticated and vicious than simple legal maneuvering. Charlotte Hawthorne understood that in their world, reputation was often more valuable than money, and she had weaponized social media with the precision of a military strategist. Olivia discovered the extent of Charlotte's campaign while reviewing the morning intelligence reports that Dr. Miranda Hayes now provided daily. The crisis management specialist spread a collection of screenshots across the conference table in Maxwell's office, her expression grim. "It started 3 days ago," Dr. Hayes explained, pulling up Charlotte's primary social media account on her tablet. "She's positioned herself as the wronged family matriarch, bravely protecting the Hawthorne legacy from a calculated con artist." The posts were masterfully crafted, each one designed to inflict maximum damage while maintaining Charlotte's image as a dignified victim. Photos of Olivia at various social events were paired with captions that twisted every interaction into evidence of manipulation and gold-digging behavior. "Look at this one," Dr. Hayes continued, scrolling to a particularly vicious post. "The lengths some people will go to for money never cease to amaze me. First she seduced poor Julian Redford with a carefully planned pregnancy, and now she's manipulating the grieving Maxwell Ashford with fabricated stories about secret inheritances. When will these vulnerable men learn to protect themselves from such calculated predators?" Olivia felt her eyes flash silver as she read the post, which had already garnered thousands of likes and hundreds of comments from New York's elite social circle. Each comment was more cruel than the last, dissecting her character, her motives, and her worthiness with the cold precision of a medical examination. The engagement announcement made it worse, Fiona Matthews added, consulting her own tablet. Julian's engagement to Celeste Montgomery was announced yesterday, and Charlotte immediately spun it as proof that Olivia's claims about their relationship were delusional fantasies. Olivia stared at the announcement photo, Julian looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, his arm around a stunning blonde woman whose pedigree was even more impressive than her beauty. Celeste Montgomery, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, with a smile that could have graced magazine covers and a bank account that made her the perfect trophy wife for an ambitious CEO. "How long?" Olivia asked, her voice carefully controlled. "How long what?" Fiona replied. "How long have they been together? Because that engagement ring isn't something you buy after a whirlwind romance. That's a family heirloom, and those take time to resize and reset." Maxwell moved to stand behind Olivia's chair, his hands settling on her shoulders in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Does it matter?" "It matters because it means Julian was engaged to someone else while he was promising to marry me," Olivia said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It means everything he said to me was a lie from the very beginning." But even as she processed Julian's betrayal, Gabriella Ashford was adding fuel to the fire from her own social media platforms. As Maxwell's sister, her endorsement of Charlotte's narrative carried additional weight among their shared social circles. Sometimes the people we try to help show their true colors in the most disappointing ways, Dr. Hayes read from Gabriella's latest post. My heart breaks for my brother, whose generous nature has been exploited by someone clearly desperate for any connection to wealth and status. I pray he sees the truth before it's too late. The post was accompanied by a carefully curated selection of photos showing Olivia at various family events, each one chosen to make her appear calculating and opportunistic. Gabriella had even managed to find an unflattering angle from the charity gala, making Olivia's moment of triumph look like desperate attention-seeking behavior. She's good, Olivia admitted, though her voice carried more admiration for the strategy than hurt at the execution. She's making it look like she's concerned for Maxwell rather than vindictive toward me. The problem, Dr. Hayes continued, is that this campaign is working. 3 major business partnerships have quietly distanced themselves from Ashford Corporation since these posts began circulating. The implication that Maxwell's judgment might be compromised is affecting the company's reputation. Olivia felt the familiar surge of protective energy that had been growing stronger since her confrontation with Charlotte's hired thugs. Her eyes flashed silver as she stood, pacing to the window that overlooked Central Park. Then it's time to change the narrative, she said, her voice carrying that otherworldly resonance that had become more pronounced as her powers developed. They want to paint me as a gold digger desperate for status and wealth? Let's give them a demonstration of exactly how wrong they are. The Redford Industries annual shareholders gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the same venue where Olivia had purchased a building and humiliated Gabriella just weeks earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her as she prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most important public appearance of her life. The dress Maxwell had commissioned for her was a masterpiece of understated elegance, midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer with an inner light that matched her eyes. But it was the necklace that would send the real message. $2 million worth of rare blue diamonds, arranged in a design that spoke of old money and unassailable status. Are you sure about this? Maxwell asked as they prepared to leave the penthouse. Walking into Julian's engagement party is essentially entering enemy territory. Olivia checked her reflection one final time, noting how the supernatural light in her eyes seemed to make the diamonds glow with otherworldly fire. That's exactly why we need to be there. They've spent weeks painting me as desperate and scheming. Tonight, I show them that I'm neither. The museum had been transformed into a glittering wonderland for the engagement celebration. Julian and Celeste held court near the Temple of Dender, accepting congratulations from New York's elite while photographers captured every moment for the society pages. Olivia's entrance created the exact response she had hoped for. Conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned to take in her appearance. The whispers started immediately, about the dress, the diamonds, but most importantly, about the unmistakable confidence radiating from her very presence. Charlotte spotted her immediately, her face twisting with poorly concealed fury as she realized that Olivia wasn't slinking in through the back entrance like a chastened supplicant. Instead, she was making a grand entrance on the arm of one of the most powerful men in the city, wearing jewelry worth more than most people's houses. My God, Gabriella breathed, appearing at Charlotte's elbow with her own expression of shocked disbelief. Is that a Cartier heritage piece? Those diamonds are, they're museum quality. Julian had frozen mid-conversation, his champagne glass halfway to his lips as he stared at Olivia across the crowded room. Beside him, Celeste Montgomery followed his gaze, her perfect features tightening with something that might have been recognition or concern. Olivia moved through the crowd with Maxwell at her side, accepting greetings and introductions with the grace of someone born to these circles. But it was the moment she approached Julian and Celeste that the real theater began. Julian, Olivia said warmly, extending her hand as if they were casual acquaintances rather than former lovers. Congratulations on your engagement. Celeste, you look absolutely radiant. Julian's face had gone pale, but he managed to take her offered hand. Olivia. Thank you. You look expensive? Olivia suggested with a smile that could have melted steel. Yes, I've been quite busy since our last conversation. Amazing what proper financial management can accomplish. Celeste stepped forward, her own smile sharp enough to cut glass. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Celeste Montgomery. Olivia, she replied simply, not bothering to add a surname. I used to know Julian quite well, before he discovered his talent for making promises he had no intention of keeping. The barb hit its mark, and Julian's jaw tightened visibly. Olivia, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Oh, I think we're well past the time for private discussions, Olivia interrupted, her voice carrying clearly enough for nearby guests to overhear. After all, Celeste deserves to know exactly what kind of man she's marrying, doesn't she? But before Julian could respond, Celeste surprised everyone by laughing, a sound like breaking crystal that held no humor whatsoever. Oh, my dear, Celeste said, her voice dripping with condescension, I know exactly what kind of man Julian is. Just as I know exactly what kind of woman you are. The question is whether you're intelligent enough to know when you're outmatched. The threat was subtle but unmistakable, and Olivia felt that familiar energy building within her. Her eyes began to flash silver, and several guests stepped back instinctively as the very air around her seemed to change. Outmatched? Olivia's voice had taken on that otherworldly resonance that made electronics flicker and strong men nervous. By whom? A woman whose greatest accomplishment is being born wealthy, or a man whose word is worth less than the air he uses to speak it? The confrontation was attracting serious attention now, with camera phones discreetly recording what was clearly going to be the scandal of the season. But it was Charlotte's arrival that escalated the situation from social drama to something far more dangerous. How dare you, Charlotte hissed, pushing through the crowd with the fury of a woman whose carefully laid plans were unraveling in real time. How dare you show your face here, wearing stolen jewelry and pretending to be something you're not? Olivia turned to face her former stepmother, and the smile that crossed her features was absolutely predatory. Stolen? That's a serious accusation, Charlotte. I hope you have evidence to support it. Evidence? Charlotte's laugh was sharp and bitter. Everyone here knows you're nothing but a con artist, seducing wealthy men and spinning fantasies about hidden fortunes. The only question is how long it will take Maxwell to see through your act. The crowd was riveted now, sensing that they were witnessing something far more significant than typical social drama. This was a war being fought with words and reputations as weapons. Actually, Olivia said, her voice carrying to every corner of their improvised arena, I think it's time everyone knew the real truth about our relationships. She reached into her evening bag and withdrew a small recording device, not unlike the one she had used to destroy Julian's reputation at the business council meeting. Charlotte's face went white as she recognized the device. For instance, Olivia continued conversationally, people might be interested to know that Julian and Charlotte have been lovers for the past 3 years. That Julian seduced me on Charlotte's explicit instructions, hoping to gain access to assets she believed I might inherit. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the immediate area froze as the implications of Olivia's revelation sank in. Julian's face had gone ashen, while Celeste stared at her fiancé with an expression of growing horror. That's a lie, Charlotte whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Olivia pressed play on the device, and Julian's voice filled the air, but this time, he wasn't speaking to Olivia. Charlotte, darling, she's completely infatuated. It won't take much longer to get her pregnant, and once there's a child involved, she'll do anything to protect our future together. When she inherits from Edward, we'll finally have access to the Hawthorne fortune without having to wait for the old man to die. The recording continued, capturing intimate conversations between Julian and Charlotte that left no doubt about their relationship or their intentions. The plan to seduce Olivia, get her pregnant, and manipulate her into signing over her inheritance was laid out in damning detail. Celeste Montgomery turned on Julian with the fury of a woman whose perfect life had just exploded in her face. You bastard, she snarled, yanking the engagement ring from her finger and hurling it at his feet. 3 years? 3 years you've been planning this elaborate con while promising to marry me? The social destruction was complete and absolute. Julian stood exposed as not just a liar and manipulator, but as someone whose word was worthless in both business and personal matters. Charlotte's reputation as a grieving stepmother was revealed as a carefully constructed facade hiding a woman willing to pimp out her stepdaughter's own boyfriends for financial gain. But as Olivia savored her victory, she noticed that several of Charlotte's allies in the crowd weren't looking defeated, they were looking dangerous. The whispered conversations at the edges of the gathering had taken on an urgent tone that made Olivia's supernatural instincts scream warnings. It was Celeste who delivered the final threat, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to getting her way through any means necessary. "This isn't over," she said, her perfect features twisted with rage. "You think exposing our relationship changes anything? You think having money makes you untouchable? You have no idea what you've started, or what we're capable of when it comes to protecting our interests." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Olivia could hear. "Your little bastard daughter is a beautiful child. It would be such a tragedy if something happened to her because her mother couldn't learn to keep her mouth shut." The threat against Isabel triggered something primal in Olivia's genetic makeup. Her eyes blazed with silver fire so intense that several guests cried out in alarm, and the electronic devices throughout the immediate area began sparking and failing. "If you ever," Olivia began, her voice carrying the authority of an apex predator. But before she could complete the threat, Maxwell's hand closed over her arm, his touch both calming and protective. "Not here," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Not in front of cameras." Olivia allowed herself to be led away, but not before delivering a final message to the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed tonight's entertainment. But let me be very clear about something. I am not the helpless victim these people believed they could manipulate and destroy. I am something far more dangerous than they ever imagined, and if they continue to threaten my family, they will discover exactly what that means." Later that evening, back in the safety of Maxwell's penthouse, the full extent of the conspiracy began to reveal itself. Fiona Matthews had been working through the financial records that Julian and Charlotte's recorded conversations had referenced, and her findings painted a picture of deception that stretched back years. "The seduction wasn't random," Fiona explained, spreading documents across the dining room table. "Charlotte has been planning this since Olivia was 18. She's been systematically isolating her from potential allies, controlling her access to information about her real parentage, and positioning herself as the only family Olivia had left." "And Julian?" Maxwell asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Recruited specifically for this purpose," Dr. Hayes interjected, consulting her own intelligence reports. "Charlotte identified him as someone whose financial situation was precarious enough that he'd be willing to participate in a long-term con for the right price." Olivia sat in the leather chair beside the fireplace, holding Isabel and trying to process the full scope of the betrayal. Everything she had believed about her relationship with Julian had been a lie, not just the romantic promises, but the very foundation of their connection. "The question now," Fiona continued, "is what they're planning next. Because based on the intelligence we're gathering, tonight's exposure has only escalated their desperation." As if summoned by her words, Maxwell's head of security appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Sir, we have a problem. We've intercepted communications suggesting that there's going to be an attempt to drug Ms. Olivia at tomorrow night's charity auction." Olivia looked up from Isabel, her eyes flashing silver. "Let them try." But even as she spoke with newfound confidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real war was just beginning. Charlotte, Julian, and now Celeste had proven they were willing to go to any lengths to destroy her, including threatening her innocent daughter. The gloves were officially off, and Olivia was about to discover just how far her enemies were willing to go to eliminate the threat she represented to their carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation. Tomorrow night's charity auction would be more than just another social event. It would be the battlefield where the true nature of their conflict would finally be revealed. Chapter 6. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maxwell's penthouse office as Olivia sat at the head of the strategy table, her transformation from victim to predator now complete. Gone was any trace of the broken girl who had been cast out into the storm weeks ago. In her place sat a woman whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had learned that mercy was a luxury she could no longer afford. Isabel rested peacefully in her arms, the infant's supernatural alertness now a constant reminder of the genetic legacy flowing through both their veins. The baby's eyes tracked every movement in the room with an intelligence that continued to unnerve even the most seasoned members of Maxwell's inner circle. The charity auction drugging attempt was just the beginning, Dr. Miranda Hayes reported, spreading intelligence documents across the table. Our surveillance indicates that Gabriella has been coordinating with Charlotte on multiple fronts. They're planning a comprehensive assault on your reputation, your business interests, and your fitness as a mother. Olivia's eyes flashed silver, and the electronic devices in the room flickered in response to her emotional state. Then it's time to remind them that predators shouldn't mistake patience for weakness. Fiona Matthews looked up from her legal briefs, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I take it you've reviewed the financial intelligence reports on Gabriella Ashford? Thoroughly, Olivia replied, her voice carrying that otherworldly resonance that had become more pronounced as her powers developed. Cocaine addiction funded through systematic tax evasion, multiple offshore accounts used to hide assets from federal authorities, and a lifestyle that costs 3 times her legitimate income. Quite the collection of vulnerabilities. Robert Fisher pulled up financial projections on his tablet, his expression pleased. The media contacts are in place. When you give the word, Gabriella's entire financial house of cards will collapse in a very public and very permanent way. Olivia stood gracefully, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. The city spread out below her like a vast chessboard, and she was finally ready to start moving pieces with the ruthless efficiency her bloodline demanded. Do it, she said simply. All of it. I want Gabriella Ashford destroyed so completely that she serves as an example to anyone else who thinks they can threaten my family. Maxwell moved to stand beside her, his presence both protective and approving. Are you sure? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. Your enemies will know you're willing to play as dirty as they are. Olivia turned to face him, her silver eyes blazing with an intensity that made the air itself seem to shimmer. They made this personal the moment they threatened my daughter. Now they're going to learn what happens when you declare war on an alpha. Within hours, the carefully orchestrated media campaign began. Financial news outlets received detailed documentation of Gabriella's tax evasion schemes. Entertainment magazines obtained photographs of her purchasing cocaine at exclusive parties. Business journals published exposés on her hidden offshore accounts and lifestyle discrepancies. But it was the simultaneous investigation launched by federal authorities that truly demonstrated Olivia's reach and resources. By noon, Gabriella Ashford was facing criminal charges, social ostracism, and financial ruin, all delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. Gabriella's counterattack came that very afternoon, driven by desperation and a fury that clouded her judgment. She stormed into the Manhattan Athletic Club, one of the city's most exclusive social institutions, demanding an emergency meeting with the membership committee. Olivia Hawthorne, or whatever she's calling herself now, is a confirmed con artist and social climber, Gabriella announced to the assembled committee members, her usually perfect appearance disheveled from stress and barely controlled panic. As a founding family member, I demand that her membership be immediately revoked and that she be banned from all club facilities. The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances. These were men and women who had built their fortunes on reading people and situations, and Gabriella's obvious desperation was setting off alarm bells. Ms. Ashford, the club chairman said carefully, these are serious allegations. Do you have documented evidence to support your claims? Evidence? Gabriella laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. The entire city knows she's a fraud. She's manipulated my brother, seduced and blackmailed Julian Redford, and somehow convinced people she has billions of dollars that don't exist. The woman is clearly mentally unstable and has no business in respectable society. It was at that moment that Olivia made her entrance, moving through the club's mahogany-paneled corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged in every room she entered. She wore a simple but elegant business suit that somehow managed to convey both professional authority and understated wealth. Gentlemen, she said, nodding to the committee members before turning her attention to Gabriella. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Gabriella's face flushed with rage and humiliation. You have no right to be here. This is a private club for respectable members of society, not social climbing con artists. Olivia's smile was absolutely predatory as she reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents. Respectable members, yes. Which is why I was so concerned when I learned about the irregularities in certain membership accounts. She spread the documents across the committee table, revealing financial records that painted a devastating picture of Gabriella's conduct. Tax evasion, money laundering through club accounts, and using member resources to fund illegal drug purchases. I'm afraid Ms. Ashford's behavior reflects rather poorly on the club's reputation. The committee members leaned forward to examine the evidence, their expressions growing increasingly grim as they absorbed the scope of Gabriella's criminal activities. Of course, Olivia continued conversationally, as the majority shareholder in Atlantic Holdings, which owns controlling interests in this club, the Meridian Country Club, and the exclusive tennis association. I felt it was my responsibility to bring these concerns to your attention. The silence that followed was deafening. Gabriella stared at Olivia with an expression of complete shock, finally understanding that she had walked into a trap of her own making. Controlling interests, the club chairman asked, his voice carefully neutral. 65% of Atlantic Holdings, Olivia confirmed, producing additional documentation. Which gives me effective control over membership decisions, policy changes, and disciplinary actions. I purchased the shares last week through a series of shell corporations, perfectly legal, I assure you. Gabriella's face had gone white as the implications sank in. That's impossible. You can't just buy. Actually, I can, Olivia interrupted, her voice carrying that supernatural authority that made grown men step backward. And I have. The question now is whether Ms. Ashford's membership should be terminated immediately, or whether we should wait for the federal investigators to finish building their case. The committee members exchanged meaningful glances before the chairman cleared his throat. I believe an immediate termination would be appropriate under the circumstances. Olivia nodded approvingly. Excellent. And I trust that Ms. Ashford will be escorted from the premises immediately, with instructions that she is not to return under any circumstances. As security guards moved to escort a shell-shocked Gabriella from the building, Olivia delivered her final blow. Oh, and Gabriella? You might want to contact your lawyers. The IRS investigation is just the beginning. When you threaten someone's child, you discover exactly how many resources they're willing to deploy to protect their family. The legal assault came that evening, delivered through Julian Redford's attorneys with the precision of a military strike. Olivia was reviewing intelligence reports in Maxwell's office when Fiona Matthews burst through the doors, her usual composure shattered by the urgency of the situation. Julian's filing for emergency paternal rights, Fiona announced, spreading legal documents across the conference table. He's claiming that you're an unfit mother, that your recent behavior demonstrates mental instability, and that Isabel needs protection from your increasingly erratic and dangerous conduct. Olivia felt that familiar energy building within her, but this time it was different, more controlled, more focused. Her eyes began to glow with silver fire as she read through Julian's petition. He's demanding full custody? Maxwell asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Worse, Fiona replied. He's proposing a settlement where Olivia marries him, merges her offshore assets with Redford Corporation, and agrees to joint custody with him having primary parental authority. If she refuses, he'll pursue full custody and argue that her delusional claims about her inheritance prove she's mentally incompetent. Olivia stood slowly, her supernatural presence filling the room with an energy that made the lights flicker and the air itself seem to vibrate. He wants to use my daughter as leverage to force me into a business merger? That's exactly what he wants, Fiona confirmed. And given his financial resources and legal team, he might actually succeed if we can't demonstrate that your assets are legitimate and substantial. It was at that moment that Edward Hawthorne appeared in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled and his face haggard with desperation. The man who had raised Olivia for 22 years looked like he had aged a decade in the weeks since their last confrontation. Olivia, he said, his voice breaking with emotion and fear. I need to talk to you. Please. The silence that followed was electric with tension. This was the man who had cast her out, who had chosen to believe Charlotte's lies over 22 years of love and shared memories. But it was also the man who had been her father in every way that mattered, until the blood test had shattered their world. Talk, Olivia said simply, her voice carrying no warmth but no active hostility either. Edward entered the room cautiously, clearly overwhelmed by the collection of powerful people surrounding Olivia. The federal investigators came to see me this morning. Money laundering, embezzlement, tax fraud, they have evidence of crimes going back 15 years. He collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking as he continued. I thought I was being careful. I thought the offshore accounts were untraceable. But someone's been providing the FBI with detailed financial records, account numbers, transaction histories, everything they need to destroy me completely. Olivia felt a cold certainty settling in her chest. Charlotte. Edward nodded miserably. She's been documenting everything for years. Every questionable transaction, every creative accounting decision, every regulatory shortcut I've taken to keep the company profitable. She has enough evidence to send me to prison for the rest of my life. And in exchange for your conviction, Olivia said, the pieces falling into place, she maintains control of Hawthorne Industries while claiming she was an innocent victim of your criminal schemes. She's offering to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity, Edward confirmed. She'll get to keep everything while I take the blame for everything that went wrong. The bitter irony wasn't lost on any of them. Charlotte had orchestrated Olivia's destruction to gain access to Fenris Hawthorne's hidden fortune, but she had also been preparing to destroy Edward and claim the legitimate Hawthorne empire for herself. Why come to me? Olivia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Because you have resources I don't, Edward said quietly. Clean money, legitimate assets, the kind of financial backing that could cover the missing funds and satisfy the federal investigators. If you help me, I can make restitution and avoid prison. And if I don't? Edward's face crumpled with defeat. Then Charlotte wins everything. She destroys both of us and walks away with two separate fortunes. Olivia studied the man who had been her father, seeing past his desperation to the genuine remorse and fear beneath. This was the moment she had to decide whether revenge or justice would guide her actions. Julian's arrival an hour later turned the evening into a full-scale confrontation. He strode into Maxwell's penthouse with the arrogance of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and legal maneuvering, flanked by two expensive lawyers and a court-appointed child welfare investigator. Olivia, he said, his voice carrying false warmth that couldn't disguise the predatory calculation in his eyes. I hope you've had time to consider my proposal. For Isabel's sake, I think we should resolve this matter quickly and amicably. Olivia rose from her chair slowly, her supernatural presence filling the room with an energy that made the newcomers visibly uncomfortable. Her eyes had begun to glow with that otherworldly silver light, and the very air seemed to shimmer around her. Your proposal, she repeated, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies beyond normal human hearing. You mean your attempt to use my daughter as leverage to steal my assets? Julian's confidence wavered slightly as he took in Olivia's transformed appearance. This wasn't the desperate young woman he had seduced and abandoned. This was something far more dangerous. Olivia, let's be reasonable, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isabel needs stability, financial security, a proper family structure. I can provide all of that. Can you? Olivia took a step toward him, and Julian unconsciously stepped backward. Can you provide the kind of security that comes from having a mother who would literally tear apart anyone who threatens her child? As she spoke, Olivia's genetic modifications began manifesting in ways that went beyond glowing eyes and electronic interference. Her movements became fluid and predatory, her very presence radiating the kind of primal authority that made lesser predators submit or flee. Julian's lawyers exchanged nervous glances as the temperature in the room seemed to drop and the lights began flickering in rhythm with Olivia's heartbeat. Julian, Olivia continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her alpha genetics, you made a critical error in judgment. You assumed I was still the broken girl you seduced and abandoned. You thought you could manipulate me through legal threats and financial pressure. She moved closer, and Julian found himself backing away despite every instinct telling him to stand his ground. But I'm not that girl anymore. I'm something far more dangerous than you ever imagined. I'm a mother protecting her child, and I have resources and abilities that your limited human understanding can't even comprehend. The supernatural energy radiating from Olivia reached a crescendo, and Julian finally understood that he was no longer dealing with a normal human being. The woman standing before him moved with inhuman grace, her eyes blazed with otherworldly fire, and her very presence triggered every survival instinct in his genetic code. "Here's what's going to happen," Olivia said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You're going to withdraw your custody petition. You're going to publicly acknowledge that your previous claims about our relationship were fabricated for financial gain. And you're going to disappear from my daughter's life forever." "And if I refuse?" Julian managed to ask, though his voice was barely above a whisper. Olivia smiled, and the expression was absolutely terrifying in its predatory beauty. "Then you'll discover exactly what kind of creature you tried to manipulate and control. And Julian? I promise you that it will be the last mistake you ever make." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence, and Julian's lawyers were already gathering their papers and heading for the door. The child welfare investigator had gone pale and was muttering about filing a report recommending against any custody changes. As Julian fled with his remaining courage in tatters, Olivia turned back to Edward, her expression softening slightly as her supernatural energy began to recede. "I'll help you," she said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because Charlotte doesn't deserve to win. But understand this, you get one chance to prove you've learned from your mistakes. Cross me again, and you'll discover that I'm capable of much worse than simple financial ruin." Edward nodded gratefully, tears streaming down his face as he realized that the daughter he had cast out was offering him salvation he didn't deserve. The war was far from over, but Olivia had finally embraced her true nature. She was no longer hiding her power or pretending to be something she wasn't. She was an alpha, a predator, a force of nature that her enemies had foolishly awakened. And now they were about to learn exactly what that meant. Chapter 7. The war room in Maxwell's penthouse had been transformed into the command center for the most sophisticated corporate destruction campaign Manhattan had ever witnessed. Olivia stood before a wall of monitors displaying real-time financial data, legal proceedings, and surveillance footage, orchestrating the systematic annihilation of her enemies with the precision of a master strategist. 3 weeks had passed since Julian's humiliating retreat, and Olivia had used every hour to devastating effect. Her alpha instincts, now fully awakened, had given her an almost supernatural ability to identify weaknesses and exploit them with ruthless efficiency. Charlotte's pharmaceutical company just lost its FDA approval for 3 major drugs, Fiona Matthews reported, her voice carrying deep satisfaction as she reviewed the legal documents on her tablet. "The regulatory violations we uncovered go back 5 years, falsified safety data, bribed inspectors, and covered up adverse reactions that should have triggered recalls." Olivia adjusted Isabel in her arms, noting how the 6-week-old infant seemed to absorb every word of the strategy session with those unnaturally intelligent eyes. The baby had been developing at an accelerated rate that amazed even the specialized pediatricians Maxwell had consulted, sitting up on her own, tracking complex conversations, and responding to stimuli with a cognitive awareness that defied medical explanation. "The financial impact?" Olivia asked, her voice carrying that otherworldly resonance that had become more pronounced as her powers developed. Robert Fisher pulled up market projections on the central monitor. Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals lost 60% of its stock value overnight. Combined with the federal investigation into Edward's embezzlement, the company is hemorrhaging assets faster than Charlotte can liquidate them. "And Julian?" Olivia's eyes flashed silver as she spoke her former lover's name. "Redford Corporation is facing hostile takeover attempts from 3 different directions," Robert continued with obvious pleasure. "The shell companies you established have been systematically acquiring his suppliers, undercutting his shipping contracts, and exposing safety violations across his fleet. His insurance companies have dropped coverage, his banking partnerships have been terminated, and his stock price has collapsed by 75%. Dr. Miranda Hayes looked up from her own intelligence reports. "Gabriella's situation is even worse. The federal investigation into her tax evasion has expanded to include her criminal associates. Apparently, her cocaine supplier was also running money laundering operations for several organized crime families. She's looking at potential RICO charges that could result in decades in prison." Olivia moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city that had once seemed so powerful and intimidating. Now she saw it for what it truly was, a vast network of vulnerabilities and pressure points that could be manipulated by someone with sufficient resources and intelligence. "They're getting desperate," she observed, her supernatural senses picking up the undercurrents of fear and panic that were beginning to ripple through their enemies' communications. "Desperate people make dangerous decisions." As if summoned by her words, Maxwell entered the war room with an expression that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "We have a problem." All three of them, Charlotte, Julian, and Gabriella, were spotted meeting at a private estate outside the city. "Our surveillance couldn't penetrate the property's security, but the fact that they're coordinating suggests they're planning something significant." Olivia felt that familiar surge of protective energy that had become her signature response to threats against her family. Isabel seemed to sense her mother's emotional state, making soft cooing sounds that carried an almost musical quality. "Let them plan," Olivia said, her voice carrying absolute confidence. "They're about to discover that hunting an alpha requires more than desperation and criminal conspiracy." The annual Elite Business Summit was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a glittering showcase where New York's most powerful business leaders gathered to network, make deals, and display their wealth and influence. This year's event carried additional significance. It would be the first major public appearance where Olivia demonstrated the full extent of her transformation from victim to apex predator. Olivia's entrance commanded immediate attention. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to shimmer with inner light, complemented by jewelry that spoke of wealth beyond imagination. But it was her presence that truly dominated the room, an aura of supernatural authority that made conversations pause and power brokers turn to assess this new force in their carefully ordered world. Maxwell moved beside her with the protective instincts of an alpha recognizing his mate, while Isabel rested peacefully in Olivia's arms, the infant's unusual alertness drawing curious glances from the assembled elite. "Ladies and gentlemen," the summit chairman announced, "tonight's presentations will include several significant business announcements, including a special address from Olivia Hawthorne regarding recent developments in corporate accountability and ethical business practices." The murmur that rippled through the crowd carried undercurrents of anticipation and apprehension. Everyone present had heard fragments of the rumors surrounding Olivia's mysterious wealth and the systematic destruction of several prominent business leaders. Tonight, they would finally understand the scope of what they were witnessing. Charlotte, Julian, and Gabriella had positioned themselves strategically throughout the ballroom, clearly hoping to present a united front against whatever Olivia planned to reveal. But their body language betrayed the desperation underlying their carefully maintained facades. When Olivia took the stage, the room fell into complete silence. She stood before the microphone with the confidence of someone who had never doubted their right to command attention, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. "Distinguished colleagues," she began, her words resonating with that supernatural authority that made electronics flicker and strong men nervous. "Tonight, I want to share with you a story about corporate corruption, personal betrayal, and the consequences of underestimating someone you believe is powerless." She activated the presentation system, and the massive screens flanking the stage came to life with financial documents, recorded conversations, and surveillance footage that painted a devastating picture of conspiracy and fraud. For the past 6 months, 3 individuals in this room have been conducting an elaborate scheme to defraud me of my legitimate inheritance while destroying my reputation and stealing my child, Olivia continued, her gaze sweeping across the audience before settling on her targets. Charlotte Hawthorne, Julian Redford, and Gabriella Ashford believed they could manipulate me through seduction, legal threats, and social ostracism. The first recording began playing, Julian's voice filling the ballroom as he discussed his seduction strategy with Charlotte, their intimate relationship laid bare for hundreds of the city's most influential people to witness. "What you're hearing," Olivia explained as gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the audience, "is evidence of a conspiracy that included falsified legal documents, perjured testimony, and systematic embezzlement from multiple corporate entities." The evidence continued mounting, financial records showing Charlotte's theft from Edwards Company, surveillance footage of Gabriella purchasing illegal drugs with laundered money, and documented proof of Julian's manipulation of shipping manifests to hide smuggling operations. "These 3 individuals," Olivia said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment, "believed they could destroy me because I was young, female, and recently devastated by personal tragedy. They assumed I would be easy prey for their schemes." Her eyes began to glow with that otherworldly silver light as she delivered her final blow. "They were wrong. I am not prey. I am the hunter. And tonight, You've witnessed what happens when apex predators eliminate threats to their territory. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in the room understood that they had just witnessed the public execution of three of New York's most prominent figures. Charlotte, Julian, and Gabriella sat frozen in their seats, their faces pale with the realization that their carefully constructed lives had been demolished in front of the very people whose opinions determined their social and business viability. As Olivia left the stage, she could feel the shift in power dynamics rippling through the room. She was no longer an outsider seeking acceptance. She was a force that others would either respect or fear. The retaliation came 3 days later, delivered with the desperation of cornered animals fighting for survival. Olivia was reviewing acquisition reports in Maxwell's office when his head of security burst through the doors with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Ma'am, we have a serious problem," he announced, his professional composure cracking under the weight of urgency. "Our surveillance detected a coordinated assault team moving toward the building. Multiple vehicles, professional equipment, and weapons that suggest they're planning an extraction operation." Olivia felt her alpha instincts explode into full alert status, her supernatural senses extending throughout the building to assess threats and calculate defensive strategies. Isabel, responding to her mother's emotional state, began making sounds that were almost musical in their complexity. "How many?" Maxwell demanded, already moving toward the emergency protocols cabinet. 12 that we can identify, but there could be more," the security chief replied. "And sir, we've intercepted communications suggesting that this is a kidnapping operation specifically targeting the baby." The words hit Olivia like a physical blow, triggering a surge of protective fury that made the lights throughout the penthouse flicker and the electronic security systems respond with enhanced sensitivity. "They want to take Isabel," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond normal human hearing. "They think they can use her to force me to surrender everything I've built." But even as the security team prepared defensive positions and evacuation protocols, Olivia felt a strange calm settling over her. Her alpha genetics were providing tactical awareness and combat readiness that went far beyond normal human capabilities. The attack began with precision timing. Explosive charges disabled the building's main power grid while armed teams entered through multiple access points. But what the attackers hadn't anticipated was that Olivia's supernatural abilities had evolved far beyond simple enhanced strength and speed. As the assault team reached the penthouse level, they found themselves facing something that defied their training and experience. Olivia moved through the darkened corridors with predatory grace, her eyes blazing with silver fire that provided perfect night vision while her enhanced senses tracked every heartbeat and breath within a 100-foot radius. The first attacker never saw her coming. Olivia appeared behind him like a shadow given form, her enhanced strength allowing her to render him unconscious with a single precise strike. The second and third fell in rapid succession, their sophisticated weapons useless against an opponent who moved faster than their targeting systems could track. But it was when they reached Isabel's nursery that the truly extraordinary occurred. The remaining attackers had cornered Olivia against the far wall, their leader holding a tranquilizer gun while others prepared restraints for both mother and child. "Just take the baby," the leader instructed his team. "Once we have the kid, the mother will cooperate." As one of the attackers reached for Isabel, the infant's unusual intelligence manifested in a way that shocked everyone present. The 6-week-old baby opened her mouth and spoke her first words, not in the babbling sounds typical of infants, but in a clear, commanding voice that carried supernatural authority. "Release my mother. Now." The words hit the attackers like a physical force, compelling obedience through some genetic imperative that bypassed rational thought. The man reaching for Isabel stumbled backward as if struck, while others found themselves lowering their weapons despite every instinct telling them to complete their mission. Olivia stared at her daughter in amazement, recognizing that Isabel's genetic heritage was manifesting abilities that went far beyond anything she had imagined. The baby's eyes blazed with the same silver fire as her mother's, and her voice carried frequencies that triggered submission responses in the attackers. The extraction team fled in confusion and terror, their mission abandoned as they struggled to understand what they had encountered. As sirens wailed in the distance and Maxwell's security forces secured the building, Olivia held Isabel close and marveled at the realization that her daughter was something even more extraordinary than she had suspected. Charlotte's final gambit came in the form of a carefully orchestrated reconciliation dinner, delivered through intermediaries who presented it as a desperate mother's attempt to heal the wounds within their fractured family. The invitation arrived with security guarantees and promises of neutral ground, but Olivia's supernatural instinct screamed warnings that made her certain this was another trap. "It's obviously a setup," Fiona Matthews said as they reviewed the invitation in Maxwell's secure conference room. "Charlotte's legal situation is hopeless, her financial empire is collapsing, and she's facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment. This dinner is her last chance to eliminate you before her world completely collapses." Olivia studied the elegant invitation, her enhanced senses detecting subtle chemical traces that confirmed her suspicions. "She's planning to poison me." "Then we decline," Maxwell said immediately, his protective instincts flaring at the threat to Olivia's safety. But Olivia's smile carried the predatory satisfaction of a hunter who had finally cornered her prey. "No. We accept. Because it's time Charlotte learned that I'm far more dangerous than she ever imagined." The dinner was held at Charlotte's penthouse apartment, a space that had once intimidated Olivia but now seemed pathetically insignificant compared to the power she had acquired. Charlotte had clearly spent considerable effort creating an atmosphere of elegance and reconciliation, but Olivia's supernatural senses detected the underlying currents of desperation and malice. "Olivia, darling," Charlotte said as she opened the door, her smile carrying the same false warmth that had characterized their relationship for years. "Thank you for coming. I know things have been difficult between us, but I truly believe we can work through our differences." Olivia entered the apartment with Isabel in her arms, noting how her daughter's unusual alertness seemed to intensify in Charlotte's presence. The baby's eyes tracked Charlotte's movements with an intelligence that made the older woman visibly uncomfortable. The dinner conversation was a masterpiece of false sentiment and carefully veiled threats, with Charlotte alternating between expressions of regret and subtle attempts to manipulate Olivia into lowering her guard. But when the main course arrived, an elaborate seafood dish that Charlotte claimed was Olivia's childhood favorite, Olivia's enhanced senses immediately detected the poison. The compound was sophisticated, designed to mimic a severe allergic reaction that would appear natural and unpreventable. In a normal human, it would cause respiratory failure within minutes. But Olivia was no longer entirely human. She ate the poisoned dish while maintaining casual conversation, watching Charlotte's face carefully for signs of anticipation and satisfaction. As minutes passed without any visible effect, Charlotte's composure began to crack. "Are you feeling all right?" Charlotte asked, her voice tight with poorly concealed anxiety. Olivia smiled, her eyes beginning to glow with that supernatural silver light that had become her signature. "I feel wonderful, Charlotte. Though I have to say, the seasoning on this dish is quite distinctive. Almost like you added something extra." The blood drained from Charlotte's face as she realized that her final gambit had failed completely. "I don't know what you mean. Don't you?" Olivia's voice carried that otherworldly resonance that made the crystal glasses on the table vibrate in harmony. "Charlotte, did you really think that the same genetic modifications that allow me to move faster than human reflexes and display superhuman strength wouldn't also include enhanced metabolism and toxin resistance?" She stood gracefully, still holding Isabel, and moved toward Charlotte with predatory purpose. "You've tried manipulation, legal warfare, social destruction, physical assault, and now assassination. Every single attempt has failed because you refuse to accept what I've become." Charlotte backed against the wall, her carefully maintained facade finally crumbling to reveal the desperate, cornered animal beneath. "You're not human," she whispered. "No," Olivia agreed, her eyes blazing with otherworldly fire as she embraced the truth of her transformation. "I'm something far more dangerous. I'm evolution in action. I'm what happens when you threaten an alpha's child and force them to embrace their true nature." As police sirens wailed in the distance, summoned by evidence of the attempted poisoning that Olivia had discreetly transmitted to authorities, Charlotte Hawthorne finally understood that she had awakened something that would destroy everything she had built. The hunt was nearly complete, and Olivia had become the apex predator she was always meant to be. Chapter 8. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the federal courthouse as Olivia Hawthorne stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the prosecutor's office, watching the media circus unfold below. News vans lined the street like predators waiting for a kill, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical vultures. Today would mark the final phase of her transformation from victim to victor. The grand jury has returned indictments on all counts, District Attorney Margaret Johnson announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a prosecutor who had built an airtight case. Charlotte Hawthorne faces charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud, and racketeering. Julian Redford is being charged with conspiracy, money laundering, and securities fraud. The evidence you provided has given us everything we need to ensure they spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Olivia adjusted Isabel in her arms, noting how the now 2-month-old infant seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The baby's extraordinary development continued to amaze the specialists Maxwell had consulted. She was already showing signs of advanced cognitive function that defied medical explanation, and her eyes carried an intelligence that seemed almost ancient. And Gabriella Ashford? Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer from her own intelligence network. Fled to a non-extradition country 3 days ago, the prosecutor replied with obvious frustration. But we've frozen all her assets, and she'll never be able to return to the United States without facing a lifetime in prison. Her exile is its own form of justice. Fiona Matthews entered the office carrying a tablet loaded with real-time financial data. Redford Corporation's stock price hit zero at market open. The company is filing for bankruptcy, and Julian's personal assets are being seized to pay restitution to the investors he defrauded. He's lost everything, his fortune, his reputation, his freedom. Olivia felt a surge of satisfaction that resonated through her alpha genetics. The hunt was complete, her enemies destroyed or scattered. But this was merely the end of one phase and the beginning of something far more significant. There's one more matter to address, she said, her voice carrying that otherworldly resonance that had become her signature. Edward Hawthorne has requested a meeting. The conference room at Maxwell's corporate headquarters had been transformed into a stage for the final act of Olivia's revenge. Edward sat across from her, his once powerful presence reduced to that of a broken man desperate for mercy. The federal investigation had stripped him of his fortune, his company, and his freedom. He was scheduled to begin serving his sentence for embezzlement in 2 weeks. Olivia, he began, his voice trembling with an emotion she had never heard from him before. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to consider showing mercy. The trust fund my father established, it's only $5 million. It would allow me to survive in prison, maybe even rebuild something small when I get out. Olivia studied the man who had thrown her out into a thunderstorm while calling her bastard trash, who had denied her heritage and cast her aside when she needed family most. The irony wasn't lost on her that he now sat before her, pleading for the very compassion he had refused to show. You threw me out with nothing, she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. You called me garbage and told me I had no right to the Hawthorne name. You live-streamed my humiliation and made me sign away my inheritance while I was bleeding from childbirth. Edward's face crumpled as he realized the futility of his plea. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you terribly. But surely you can find it in your heart to enjoy the same treatment, Olivia interrupted, rising from her chair with the fluid grace of a predator dismissing its prey. She nodded to Maxwell's security team, who moved forward to escort Edward from the building. Gentlemen, please see Mr. Hawthorne out. He's no longer welcome in my presence. As Edward was led away, his desperate pleas echoing down the hallway, Olivia felt the final pieces of her transformation lock into place. She was no longer the wounded girl who had begged for acceptance. She was the apex predator who determined the fate of others. The boardroom of the newly reformed Hawthorne Empire stretched before an assembly of Manhattan's most powerful business leaders, each one carefully selected for their ability to contribute to Olivia's vision of corporate dominance. The company that had once been Edward's corrupt pharmaceutical empire had been rebuilt from the ground up, its illegal operations replaced with legitimate ventures that spanned biotechnology, real estate, and financial services. Olivia stood at the head of the massive conference table, wearing a tailored suit that spoke of absolute authority. Isabel rested in a high-tech carrier that allowed the infant to observe the proceedings while remaining secure, her unusually alert gaze tracking the faces of the assembled executives. Ladies and gentlemen, Olivia began, her voice carrying the supernatural resonance that made the room's electronics hum with sympathetic vibration. today marks the official coronation of the new Hawthorne Empire. We have built something that extends far beyond the corruption and small-mindedness of the previous regime. She activated the presentation system, revealing financial projections that painted a picture of unprecedented growth and market dominance. The reformed Hawthorne Empire had absorbed the assets of her defeated enemies, creating a conglomerate worth over $15 billion that wielded influence across multiple industries. But before we discuss our future, Olivia continued, her eyes beginning to glow with that otherworldly silver light, I want to acknowledge the teachers who made this transformation possible. The central screen flickered to life, showing live feeds from 3 different federal facilities. Charlotte sat in her orange prison jumpsuit, her once perfect appearance ravaged by the stress of her conviction. Julian occupied a similar cell, his arrogant swagger replaced by the broken posture of a man who had lost everything. Even Gabriella's exile was documented, surveillance footage showing her living in a rundown apartment in a country where her stolen millions couldn't buy her the luxury she had once taken for granted. These 3 individuals, Olivia said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment, taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. They showed me that mercy is weakness, that compassion is a luxury I couldn't afford, and that true power comes from the willingness to destroy those who threaten what you love. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the assembled executives. Charlotte Hawthorne, Julian Redford, and Gabriella Ashford, I want to thank you for teaching me to be ruthless. Your lessons have made me the leader I am today. The cameras captured every moment of her enemies' humiliation, broadcasting their defeat to the very social circles where they had once wielded power. Charlotte's face crumpled as she realized that even in prison, Olivia's reach could find her. Julian stared at the screen with the empty expression of a man who had accepted his complete destruction. Gabriella, watching from her exile, could only witness the coronation of the woman she had tried to destroy. The Hawthorne Empire, Olivia concluded, will serve as a reminder to anyone who considers threatening an Alpha's family. We are not merely a corporation, we are evolution in action. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Olivia's attention was drawn to Isabel, whose extraordinary development had begun manifesting in ways that amazed even her supernatural mother. The infant's eyes tracked the presentation with perfect comprehension, and when Olivia lifted her from the carrier, Isabel spoke her second complete sentence. Mama strong, she said in that clear, commanding voice that carried frequencies beyond normal human hearing. Isabel stronger. Dr. Miranda Hayes, who had been documenting Isabel's development for the past month, approached Olivia with expression of barely contained excitement. The genetic analysis results came back this morning, she said quietly. What we're seeing is unprecedented. Olivia followed the doctor to a private conference room where complex genetic charts covered every available surface. The data painted a picture that defied conventional understanding of human development and inheritance. Isabel's genetic markers indicate she carries not just alpha traits from your bloodline, Dr. Hayes explained, but also amplified versions of the leadership genes that we've identified in the Ashford, Redford, and even the original Hawthorne lineages. Somehow, the combination has created something entirely new. Olivia studied the charts, her enhanced intelligence allowing her to understand the implications immediately. She's not just an alpha. She's the alpha, the natural leader of all the bloodlines. Exactly, the doctor confirmed. The genetic markers suggest she'll develop abilities that surpass even your own. Enhanced intelligence, supernatural charisma, physical capabilities that border on the impossible. More importantly, she carries genetic triggers that will compel submission from members of other alpha bloodlines. Olivia felt a surge of protective pride as she looked at her daughter, understanding that Isabel represented the next phase of human evolution. The corporate dynasties that had ruled Manhattan for generations would someday bow to her child's authority. There's more, Dr. Hayes continued. The genetic analysis suggests that Isabel's offspring will carry even more concentrated versions of these traits. We're looking at the foundation of a new ruling class, one that will reshape the entire structure of power in ways we can barely imagine. That evening, Olivia stood in the penthouse garden that Maxwell had created for her, watching the city lights twinkle below while Isabel slept peacefully in her arms. The infant's supernatural development continued to amaze her. At 2 months old, she was already showing signs of the extraordinary intelligence and authority that would someday make her the most powerful person in the corporate world. Maxwell joined her at the railing, his own alpha genetics allowing him to sense the contentment and satisfaction radiating from his mate. Their relationship had evolved far beyond the initial attraction and mutual protection. They had become true partners in every sense, united by their shared vision of reshaping the business world according to their will. The board meeting went well, he observed, noting the way Olivia's eyes still glowed with that otherworldly silver fire. Charlotte's expression when she realized you were broadcasting her humiliation was particularly satisfying. Olivia smiled, her predatory satisfaction tempered by the deep contentment of a hunter who had successfully protected her territory. She spent so much energy trying to destroy me that she never considered what I might become if she succeeded in awakening my true nature. And Julian? Broken beyond repair, Olivia replied with clinical detachment. His empire is scattered, his reputation destroyed, his freedom gone. He'll spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what he lost when he abandoned his child. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city that had once seemed so powerful and intimidating spread out below them. Now Olivia saw it for what it truly was, a vast network of resources and opportunities that existed to serve her will and ensure her daughter's future dominance. Gabriella's exile seems almost merciful in comparison, Maxwell observed. Mercy would have been allowing her to face trial and serve her sentence, Olivia corrected. Exile means she'll spend every day of her life knowing that she's powerless, that her former world continues without her, and that she can never return to reclaim what she lost. It's a living death, far more cruel than simple imprisonment. Isabel stirred in her arms, making soft sounds that carried that musical quality that had characterized her vocalization since birth. Olivia could feel the infant's supernatural awareness extending outward, cataloging the city below with an intelligence that defied explanation. She's going to be incredible, Maxwell said softly, reaching out to stroke Isabel's tiny hand. The genetic analysis suggests she'll develop abilities that make our own enhancements look primitive by comparison. She'll need to be, Olivia replied, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The world we're creating for her will require strength that goes beyond anything previous generations could imagine. She'll face challenges we can't even anticipate. But she'll also have advantages they never possessed, Maxwell pointed out. Unlimited resources, supernatural abilities, and the loyalty of every alpha bloodline. By the time she reaches maturity, she'll command an empire that spans continents. Olivia's smile carried the satisfaction of a mother who had successfully secured her child's future against every possible threat. Charlotte, Julian, and Gabriella taught me that power without ruthlessness is weakness. They showed me that mercy is a luxury I couldn't afford. Most importantly, they demonstrated that true strength comes from the willingness to destroy anyone who threatens what you love. As if responding to her mother's words, Isabel opened her eyes and looked directly at Olivia with an intelligence that seemed far too advanced for her age. When she spoke, her voice carried the same otherworldly authority that had characterized Olivia's transformation. "Mama's enemy's gone," she said with perfect clarity. Isabel's turn next. Olivia felt a surge of pride and anticipation as she realized that her daughter was already beginning to understand the legacy she would inherit. The Hawthorne Empire was just the beginning. Isabel would someday command resources and loyalty that would reshape the entire structure of human civilization. The hunt was complete, but the real work was just beginning. Olivia had proven herself as the apex predator of her generation. Now it was time to prepare her daughter to become something even more extraordinary, the alpha who would rule them all. In the distance, the city continued its endless dance of ambition and power, unaware that its future had already been determined by a mother's love and an infant's supernatural inheritance. The age of the alphas had begun, and Olivia Hawthorne stood at its center, ready to guide her daughter toward a destiny that would make their former enemies' worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. The queen had claimed her throne, and the princess who would surpass her was already preparing to inherit an empire that would span the world. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.